All right, let's jump right in today. We're doing a deep dive into some pretty big changes happening on the global stage. It's all about, you guessed it, the rise of BRICS. And more importantly, what it could mean for all of us. And to help us make sense of it all, we've got some insights from Professor Jeffry Sachs.
Oh, great.
Now, just in case you haven't heard of him, he's a pretty influential figure in economics and sustainable development. Advised a bunch of world leaders, written a ton of books.
Yeah.
Really knows how to connect the dots when it comes to those complicated global issues.
He does. He's
BRICS nations themselves,
yeah.
they represent almost half the world's population now.
It's a huge, it's a big story.
It's a force to be reckoned with, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
Now, Sachs makes this argument that the recent expansion of BRICS, all these new countries joining like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Iran, it's a signal that the world is moving away from a system with just one superpower in charge.
Yeah. It's a big shift. Yeah, he describes it as a move toward multipolarity.
Multipolar?
Yeah, and what's really fascinating is that he doesn't frame this as some kind of anti-West movement.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, he argues that it's more of a reaction to what a lot of countries see as, well, bullying tactics coming from the U.S., especially when it comes to sanctions.
He actually uses the word bullying.
He does, yeah, bullying. It's a pretty strong language coming from someone like Sachs, who's generally known for being, diplomatic in his approach.
Right.
So it's
If it's not about being anti-West, then what is it about? I mean, what's driving this whole BRICS thing, according to Sachs?
Well, he believes that a lot of it boils down to a desire for a more balanced and, I guess, a more equitable global order. One where countries can cooperate on things like economic development or climate change, even peace building, without feeling like they're being pressured or coerced.
It sounds like he's saying the old way of doing things just isn't cutting it anymore.
Yeah, there's definitely an element of that. He points out that the U.S. has often used its economic and military might to kind of get its way on the world stage.
Right. And that's created a lot of resentment.
Makes sense.
And he sees BRICS as offering a different model, one that's based on partnership and mutual respect.
Okay, so starting to connect some dots here.
Yeah.
But how does BRICS actually plan to make all of this happen?
Right.
How do they achieve these lofty goals?
Well, one thing Sachs highlights is the role of China. He sees China as a kind of model, especially for other BRICS members who are still in those early stages of development.
Okay.
He points to China's incredible economic transformation over the last few decades, lifting millions of people out of poverty.
So China is like the star student of BRICS then, the one that everyone else is looking up to.
Yeah, in a way, yes. But Sachs also recognizes that each country within BRICS has its own strengths and challenges.
Right, right.
He actually sees this diversity as a potential advantage, He argues that it can lead to more creative and innovative solutions. That's an interesting take because you could also argue that all that diversity could make it hard for them to agree on anything.
Exactly. And Sachs doesn't shy away from that challenge. But he believes that the key is finding that common ground, focusing on areas where they can achieve those win-win outcomes.
Okay, so they've got this vision, this ambitious vision.
Right.
But how does that translate into actual progress? Are there any concrete examples of what this BRICS cooperation looks like in action?
Yeah, actually, Sachs shares this really compelling anecdote about his own experience in Ethiopia.
Oh.
Yeah, he talks about witnessing firsthand the positive impact of some Chinese-built infrastructure, specifically a dam that brought electricity to rural communities and a railway that connected farmers to markets in the Middle East.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one thing to talk about cooperation in theory,
Yeah.
but seeing it actually making a difference in people's lives,
Right.
that's something else.
And Sachs uses this anecdote to illustrate his broader point about the potential for BRICS to drive development, not just within its own member countries, but around the world.
So it's not just about challenging the way things are.
Right.
It's about offering a real alternative.
Yeah.
A different way of doing things that could actually benefit people.
That's exactly it. And it's this combination of ambition and pragmatism,
Yeah.
that makes Sachs's perspective on BRICS so compelling. He's not just a dreamer. He's a realist, too. He understands how complex global politics can be and the challenges of actually making change happen.
Yeah, he's definitely got me thinking about BRICS differently. I'm starting to see it less as this abstract geopolitical thing
Right.
and more as a potential force for good.
And that's what makes Sachs's insights so valuable. He helps us look beyond just the headlines and understand those deeper forces at play, the motivations, the challenges, the potential of this emerging global power bloc.
So what else does Sachs have to say about BRICS? I mean, does he see any downsides or risks associated with its rise?
Well, he does acknowledge that there are some valid concerns, and we should definitely explore those in more detail.
All right, let's dig into that.
Okay.
Because I think it's important to get a balanced perspective, to look at both the potential benefits and the potential risks.
Absolutely. One of the biggest concerns Sachs addresses is the potential for, internal conflict within BRICS.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about a really diverse group of countries here.
Right.
Different political systems, economic interests, historical baggage.
Mm.
How does Sachs think they'll overcome all those differences?
Well, he argues that the key is recognizing that shared interests they have in creating a more equitable global order,
Okay.
He believes that the BRICS nations are kind of united by this common desire for a world where they have, more say and influence, a world that isn't dominated by Western powers.
Yeah, so it's almost like the enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of situation.
Yeah, there's definitely an element of that, but Sachs also emphasizes the potential for, genuine cooperation on issues like sustainable development or climate change,
Right.
even promoting peace through diplomacy.
That last part is interesting. I mean, can a group like BRICS really have an impact on global peace efforts?
Sachs thinks so. He points out that several BRICS nations have played, important mediating roles in regional conflicts. And he sees the potential for the bloc to become a more active force in global peacemaking.
Right.
He even suggests that BRICS could play a role in facilitating dialogue, pushing for a two-state solution in the Middle East.
I've heard some people criticize BRICS for being too focused on economics and not doing enough to address things like human rights or democracy.
Right.
What's Sachs' take on that?
He doesn't shy away from those criticisms. In fact, he acknowledges that some BRICS members have, less than stellar records on human rights and democratic governance.
Okay.
But he argues that focusing solely on those issues is a narrow and ultimately counterproductive approach.
What does he mean by that?
Well, he believes that economic development is a key driver of social progress.
Okay.
He argues that as countries become more prosperous, they tend to become more democratic and more respectful of human rights.
Okay.
So in his view, the best way to promote those values in the long run is to focus on economic cooperation and development.
It sounds like he's saying we need to be patient and look at the bigger picture.
Exactly. He's not condoning human rights abuses.
Right.
But he's also not letting those issues completely derail what he sees as a positive and potentially transformative global movement.
Okay, I can see his point, but there's another criticism I've heard about BRICS, which is that it's really just a vehicle for Chinese expansionism.
Yeah.
How does Sachs respond to that?
He acknowledges that China's growing influence within BRICS is a legitimate concern. I mean, after all, China is the world's second largest economy, and it's clearly playing a leading role in shaping the bloc's agenda.
So does he think that BRICS is just going to become a tool for China to assert its dominance on the world stage?
Not necessarily while he recognizes China's power.
Right.
Sachs also emphasizes the diversity of interests within BRICS.
Okay.
He points out that other member countries like India and Brazil also have their own ambitions and are not simply going to follow China's lead blindly.
So he's saying that there's still room for checks and balances within BRICS, even with China's growing influence.
That's right. And he believes that open dialogue and transparency are essential to ensuring that BRICS remains a truly collaborative effort,
Okay.
rather than a vehicle for any one country's dominance.
I'm also curious about the economic side of things.
Yeah.
What are the practical implications of BRICS for the global economy? Is it going to create a whole new financial system that rivals the Western-led system?
Sachs does believe that BRICS is challenging the dominance of Western-led financial institutions, like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund.
Those are the institutions that basically set the rules for the global economy, right?
Exactly. And Sachs argues that those rules have often been skewed in favor of developed countries,
Right.
leaving developing nations at a disadvantage. He sees BRICS as an opportunity to create a more level playing field.
Okay.
A system that's more responsive to the needs of developing economies.
So are they talking about creating their own currency or something like that?
Well, there's been some talk about creating a BRICS currency,
Right.
but it's still in the very early stages. One thing Sachs highlights is the New Development Bank,
Okay.
which was established by BRICS countries as an alternative to the World Bank.
What's different about this new development bank? What does it actually do?
The New Development Bank is focused on funding infrastructure projects in developing countries, with a particular emphasis on sustainability and climate resilience.
Okay.
Sachs sees this as a prime example of how BRICS can offer a concrete alternative to the existing global financial system.
This is really fascinating stuff. It sounds like BRICS is trying to shake things up on a lot of different fronts, not just economically, but also geopolitically, and even in terms of how we address global challenges like climate change.
That's exactly right. And Sachs doesn't see this as a zero-sum game where one side wins and the other loses.
Right.
He believes there's room for both cooperation and competition between BRICS and the West, and that ultimately a more balanced and multipolar world will benefit everyone.
But some might argue that this shift towards a multipolar world could actually make things more unstable. I mean, if you have all these different power centers vying for influence,
Right.
isn't that kind of a recipe for conflict?
Sachs acknowledges that risk,
Yeah.
but he believes that conflict is not inevitable.
Okay.
He argues that a multipolar world can be more stable if it's based on principles of mutual respect, dialogue, and a willingness to compromise.
So it's not just about shifting the balance of power.
Right.
It's also about changing the way we interact with each other on the global stage.
Exactly, and Sachs believes that BRICS, with its diverse membership and focus on cooperation, can actually play a positive role in shaping a new model for global governance.
He's definitely painting a compelling picture of a future where power is more evenly distributed and cooperation is the norm. But I have to ask, is he being too optimistic? Are there any potential downsides or risks associated with BRICS that he's overlooking?
Well, he does acknowledge that there are potential downsides.
Yeah.
He doesn't shy away from the complexities and the challenges. In fact, he dedicates a good portion of his analysis to exploring some of the potential pitfalls of BRICS.
Let's talk about those pitfalls. What are some of the potential downsides that Sachs highlights?
One of the things he points out is that BRICS is still a relatively young and untested alliance. It's only been around for a couple of decades, and it remains to be seen whether it can truly overcome the internal divisions and competing interests of its member states.
So there's a chance that it could fall apart under its own weight, so to speak.
That's a possibility. And even if it doesn't fall apart completely, there's a risk that it could become bogged down in bureaucracy and internal squabbling,
Yeah.
making it ineffective in achieving its goals.
Okay, so internal cohesion is a potential issue. What else does Sachs see as a potential risk?
He also raises concerns about the lack of transparency and accountability within BRICS because it's not a formal international organization like the UN.
Right.
There are fewer mechanisms for holding member states accountable for their actions.
That's an interesting point. I mean, if BRICS wants to be seen as a legitimate alternative to the existing global order,
Right.
doesn't it need to be more transparent and accountable?
Absolutely. And Sachs acknowledges that this is an area where BRICS needs to improve.
Okay.
He argues that greater transparency and accountability are essential for building trust both within the bloc itself and with the rest of the world.
So it's not just about challenging the existing system.
Right.
It's also about offering a better alternative,
Yeah.
a more just and equitable system.
Exactly. And Sachs believes that transparency and accountability are key pillars of any truly just and equitable system.
What about the environmental impact of BRICS? I mean, we're talking about some of the world's largest and fastest growing economies. Doesn't that raise concerns about sustainability?
Absolutely. And Sachs is very upfront about the environmental challenges posed by BRICS's economic growth.
Again?
He points out that several member countries, including China and India, are heavily reliant on fossil fuels,
Yeah.
and that their rapid industrialization has come at a significant environmental cost.
So how does he reconcile BRICS's economic ambitions with the urgent need to address climate change?
Well, he argues that BRICS has a unique opportunity to lead the way in developing and implementing green technologies. He sees this as a win-win scenario where economic growth can go hand in hand with environmental sustainability.
Okay, but how realistic is that? I mean, can countries like China and India really transition to a green economy without sacrificing that economic growth?
Sachs believes they can. He points to China's rapid advancements in renewable energy and electric vehicles as evidence of the potential for green innovation within BRICS. He argues that by investing in these technologies and sharing them with other developing countries, BRICS can accelerate the global transition to a low-carbon future.
So he's not just talking about mitigating the negative impacts of economic growth.
Right.
He's also talking about BRICS becoming a driving force for positive change on the environmental front.
Exactly. And he sees this as a key part of BRICS' mission to create a more just and sustainable world. He believes that BRICS can be a model for a new kind of globalization, one that is more equitable, sustainable, and inclusive.
Had a pretty bold vision. I'm curious to hear more about what he sees as the role of individual citizens in all of this. Does Sachs think that ordinary people can have any influence on the direction of BRICS?
He absolutely does. In fact, he believes that citizen engagement is crucial for ensuring that BRICS lives up to its potential.
Okay, but how can ordinary people get involved? What can they actually do to make a difference?
Yeah. Sachs encourages people to stay informed about BRICS, to engage in dialogue about its goals and challenges,
Okay.
and to support initiatives that promote cooperation and understanding between BRICS countries and the rest of the world.
So it's about raising awareness, fostering dialogue, and building bridges between cultures.
Exactly. And Sachs believes that these efforts can start at the local level through things like cultural exchanges, educational programs, and business collaborations.
It sounds like he's calling for a kind of grassroots movement to support BRICS' vision of a more multipolar and cooperative world.
That's a great way to put it. He believes that real change starts from the bottom up, with individuals working together to create a more just and sustainable world.
He's definitely giving us a lot to think about. This conversation has really opened my eyes to the complexities of BRICS and its potential impact on the global stage.
And we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore, especially when it comes to the implications of BRICS for specific regions and sectors.
Speaking of exploring, I'm curious to delve a bit deeper into one particular aspect of BRICS that we haven't touched on much yet. Its role in addressing global challenges, particularly climate change.
That's a great topic to dive into next. Sachs has some really interesting insights on how BRICS can be a force for positive change on the environmental front.
So we've talked about BRICS challenging that world order and how they might actually work together.
Right.
But what about their impact on, the planet?
Well, one of the most fascinating things Sachs does in his analysis is he links the rise of BRICS to this urgent need to address climate change.
Okay.
And he's not shying away from the fact that some BRICS nations, well, they have a less than stellar track record when it comes to environmental issues.
Yeah, I mean, China, India especially, huge emitters of greenhouse gases.
Exactly. But here's where it gets interesting. Sachs sees BRICS not just as part of the problem, but also as a potential part of the solution.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How do you square that circle?
Well, he argues that BRICS has this unique opportunity to really take the lead in developing and implementing green technologies.
Okay.
He sees it as a win-win, a way to address both economic development and climate change at the same time.
So it's not about choosing between growth and sustainability.
Right.
It's about finding ways to achieve both.
Precisely. And Sachs points to China's remarkable progress in renewable energy as a prime example. I mean, they've become a global leader in solar and wind power.
Right.
They're investing heavily in electric vehicles, all these other clean technologies.
So China's kind of paving the way for other BRICS countries to follow suit.
That's one way to look at it. Yeah, Sachs sees China's experience as a model for how developing countries can kind of leapfrog over those older, dirtier technologies and embrace a more sustainable path to development.
But wouldn't that require a pretty massive shift in thinking, both within BRICS and globally?
Yeah.
I mean, the current economic system still so reliant on fossil fuels.
Sachs acknowledges that it's not going to be easy, but he is convinced that it's both necessary and achievable. He argues that the costs of inaction on climate change are just too high, both in terms of environmental damage and economic disruption.
So it's not just an environmental issue, it's an economic issue as well.
Absolutely. And Sachs believes that BRICS is well positioned to capitalize on this emerging green economy. He sees a huge opportunity for BRICS countries to become leaders in clean energy, sustainable agriculture, all these other green technologies.
This is making me think about how we often frame the climate crisis as this overwhelming, global threat.
Right.
But Sachs seems to be saying that it could actually be a catalyst for innovation and cooperation, especially within BRICS.
That's a really insightful point. Sachs is definitely challenging us to rethink our assumptions about climate change, to see it not just as a problem, but also as an opportunity. He believes that BRICS can be a force for positive change,
Mm.
a driving force behind a global green revolution.
Wow, that's a powerful image.
Yeah.
A BRICS-led green revolution.
Yeah.
But let's bring it back down to the individual listener for a moment. What does all this mean for them?
Right.
How can they connect with these big ideas about BRICS and its role in the world?
Sachs emphasizes that even though these are complex global issues,
Right.
each of us has a role to play in shaping a more sustainable and equitable future.
Mm.
He encourages us to learn more about BRICS,
So?
to engage in dialogue about these issues, and to support initiatives that promote cooperation and understanding between cultures.
So it's not just about governments and big institutions.
Yeah,
It's about individual citizens taking action as well.
absolutely. Sachs believes that real change starts from the bottom up, with each of us making conscious choices in our daily lives and working together to create a better world.
This has been an incredibly thought-provoking deep dive. It's clear that BRICS is much more than just an economic bloc. It's a force that's reshaping the global landscape in some really profound ways.
And as Sachs reminds us, it's not just about watching from the sidelines.
Right.
It's about engaging with these changes, understanding the complexities, and finding ways to contribute to a more just sustainable and peaceful world.
So the next time you hear about BRICS in the news, remember this conversation. Think about the potential for positive change, the challenges that lie ahead, and the role that each of us can play in shaping this new multipolar world. That's it for our deep dive into BRICS and the insights of Professor Jeffry Sachs. We hope you found it as fascinating and thought-provoking as we did. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.